So they came out with a really important story. Um, the article's very detailed. There's a lot of moving parts, so I can't go over it all with you. I encourage you to read the whole thing on your own, though. Um, New 9/11 evidence points to deep Saudi complicity. 2 decades of U.S. policy appear to be rooted in a mistaken understanding of what happened that day, by Daniel Benjamin and Stephen Simon. For more than 2 decades, through 2 wars and domestic upheaval, the idea that Al Qaeda acted alone on 9/11 has been the basis of U.S. policy. A Blue Ribbon Commission concluded that Osama bin Laden had pioneered a new kind of terrorist group combining superior technological know-how, extensive resources, and a worldwide network so well coordinated that it could carry out operations of unprecedented magnitude. The vanguard of jihad, it seemed, was the first non-state actor that rivaled nation-states in the damage it could wreak. That assessment now appears wrong. And if our understanding of what transpired on 9/11 turns out to have been flawed, then the costly policies that the United States has pursued for the past quarter century have been rooted in a false premise. The global war on terror was based on a mistake. A new filing in a lawsuit brought by the families of 9/11 victims against the government of Saudi Arabia alleged that Al Qaeda had significant, indeed decisive, state support for its attack. Officials of the Saudi government, the plaintiffs' attorneys contend, formed and attempted a network inside the United States and provided crucial assistance to the first cohort of 9/11 hijackers to enter the country. The 71-page document released in redacted form earlier this month summarizes what the plaintiffs said they've learned through the evidence obtained in discovery and recently declassified materials. They allege that Saudi officials, most notably Fahad al-Thumairi, an imam at a Los Angeles mosque and an accredited diplomat at Saudi Arabia's consulate in that city, and Omar al-Bayoumi, who masqueraded as a graduate student but was identified by the FBI as an intelligence operative, were not rogue operators, but rather the front end of a conspiracy that included the Saudi embassy in Washington and senior government officials in Riyadh. Plaintiffs argued that Thumairi and Bayoumi organized safe reception, transportation, and housing for hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nafar al-Hazmi, beginning upon their arrival in California on January 15, 2000. The filing further argues that Thumairi and Bayoumi introduced the pair to local sympathizers in Los Angeles and San Diego who catered to their day-to-day needs, including help with immigration matters, digital and phone communication, and receiving funds from Al-Qaeda by wire transfer. Saudi officials also helped the 2 Al-Qaeda operatives, both Saudi nationals with little education or command of English, whose experience abroad consisted mostly of training and fighting for jihadist causes, to procure a car as well as a driver's license. The support network was crucial. And then I also just want to give you the little bit they say at the end. Again, this is a very long article. Here we go. Today, for most Americans, the global war on terror has become a hazy memory from the time before Donald Trump. In Washington, policymakers avoid discussing the subject, yet it bears remembering. It cost us $6 trillion, and that number is expected to go higher because of the long-term healthcare costs for veterans. It turned the Middle East upside down, increasing the regional influence of Iran. More than 7,000 American servicemen and women died in action. 30,000 more, an extraordinary number, died by suicide. In all, more than 800,000 Iraqis, Afghans, and others, most of them civilians, perished in the war. The war on terror and its origins in 9/11 are seen in retrospect as farce and tragedy, but the emerging picture of the preparations for 9/11 make recognizing the sheer scale of the blunder inescapable. So, I mean, I don't think it's, it's not super controversial nowadays, I think, to criticize the Iraq War. I mean, I think that's become a mainstream position now. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it still was a rather controversial position. And, you still have some conservatives hacks and who will defend it. But, for the most part, people put the Iraq War in the whoopsie basket, that was kind of a mistake basket. But I wanted to talk about the story because I think it just shows how backwards our American foreign policy very often is. Now, the article does go on to mention that Saudi Arabia nowadays has changed since 9/11, that there's been a decrease, at least in the government, of supporting religious terrorism. But it's insane to me that we're still allies with Saudi Arabia, right? Because, you turn on the news, so think about the Israeli-Palestine conflict, right? You turn on the news and, people are bashing Iran, for example. Like Iran is our enemy. But we're allied with Saudi Arabia. Noam Chomsky once said Iran is like a civil rights paradise compared to Saudi Arabia. I mean, we need to dump Saudi Arabia. And we're not going to, obviously, because of their oil reserves. I mean, Trump has ties with the Saudis. So do probably other U.S. presidents, I would imagine. American foreign policy just ends up being opportunistic, and it lacks a lot of the moral principles that people claim it has. And then not only that, our intelligence service is just bad. Like, not even bad as in evil, like evil or wrong. Bad as in they are bad at their job. Our intelligence service is bad at its job. Hence, why they didn't know that Saudi Arabia may have been, involved with Al-Qaeda. Maybe potentially Al-Qaeda wasn't a lone actor. Just maybe. I mean, and this is on top of God knows how many other blunders our intelligence service has made. It's appalling. It's appalling. And yeah, if we want to think of ourselves as like the quote unquote good guys, as like the people who are fighting for democracy, fighting for freedom, we need to put our money where our mouth is. We should not support a country like Saudi Arabia, and invest money in actually our intelligence service is actually doing its job. I mean, Christopher Hitchens once said, it's better to have no intelligence service at all than an intelligence service that actively works against you. I believe he was talking about the CIA in that particular instance. But no, this is a big story, man. This is a big story. I mean, and yeah, it does seem, the Iraq War does seem very far off in the distance, given, the political goings on nowadays, a la post-Trump. That's one of the weird casualties. Neoconservatism, bizarrely, is one of the weird casualties of the Donald Trump years. I don't think that was intentional on anyone's part. It just seems to kind of happened. Partly, presumably, due to the isolationist rhetoric that is springing up more on the right now. But yeah, I mean, I guess one final point that the article also mentions, that the Iraq War was such a disaster. Like, we caused such chaos in the Middle East that we created ISIS. What we thought Al Qaeda was, right? Like a organization that really transcended national boundaries and governments and states and people who were sort of acting somewhat independently, but really all towards the same goal. Like, we thought Al Qaeda was that. That's what ISIS actually is. So, our misunderstanding of Al Qaeda actually created what we thought Al Qaeda was. Al Qaeda and ISIS is 10 times worse than Al Qaeda. Even Osama bin Laden was like, yeah, ISIS, I think they're killing too many Muslims. Osama bin Laden said that. So yeah, I mean, we'll see if more, documents get declassified, or we'll also see if the courts, who the courts ultimately decide with, because the Saudi government is trying to get this case dismissed. Again, we'll see what the court decides on that. But the story doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I've been saying for years we need to dump Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia should not be one of our allies. And whether or not their government has changed somewhat for the better, that doesn't change the fact that that doesn't change the facts of the matter.